YouTube, Dustin Dolby here. Welcome back to another luscious episode of Workflow. Today I'm going to run you through a simple workflow for product photography on a flat or digital background, just using Photoshop compositing. So I'll build this up really quick. I'll show you my full composite in Photoshop to combine layers, cut this out on a flat background, and this can apply to so many products. We're using a quick household product here today. And if you have any questions, leave them below, because we're just using entry-level gear, speedlights, all the really inexpensive stuff. And thank you to Zyro for sponsoring today's video. So I'm going to show a little bit of a different tethering screen today than I normally use. Let me know what you think of it. I'm showing you two views at once, essentially. And I thought maybe it could be helpful. So we brought out our Speedlight Stripbox for a bit of a flat exposure, as you're seeing here. And that's just shooting right at the white wall. I love using the white wall, but if you angle your light against it, we might get something a little spicier, a little more interesting. I mean, it is a bottle of mouthwash, but we can make the volume in the liquid look its best, certainly. So we're getting some refraction. The background's bright at the left, but the liquid's bright at the right, so it's flipping it around. It's giving a bit of volume to the drink. The mouthwash, you don't want to pound this back. And over here is creating a dark pocket, which we can actually use to put a highlight in, which might be useful. It's a good place to put a highlight. It's kind of like white wine photography, ironically. So I'm going to bring out a second strip box here, 8 by 36 inches. I'll link both these below. I just grabbed the inexpensive ones off Amazon, and they've served me really well with speedlights and a Bowen's mount. So at 1/32 power here, I just want to demonstrate that we can isolate our lighting, our background lighting, and our foreground lighting, and get a big glossy highlight on the bottle. It's a pretty big highlight. It's showing off some glossiness. The label is going crazy, and compositing can be useful for that, salvaging labels. And not to have a myriad of problems, but also the cap is rotated, which is common in manufacturing. I mean, it might be 1 in 1,000 that have a perfect cap, and it's locked in there. So we'll just have to do a quick rotation at the end, no problem. For labels, I usually like to take a safety exposure of some sort for the labels, especially if things are super glossy. Sometimes I'll take my speedlight out of the strip box. I'm at full power here, and just off the ceiling, I'm going to take a safety exposure and then put that back in our strip box. And the purpose of the safety exposure is just to make sure we have good legible data compared to something glossier. And we can keep that in our back pocket or bring it in selectively. But many of the labeled areas are going to be really simple when you bounce off a white ceiling. They're going to get a really soft, simple lighting. And that can be really useful or even save you in some scenarios. So that's good to know. Just going to double check this is at the right power here, 132, and I'm just going to make a rotation for our Listerine. So we're looking at the center of this cap, so we can composite it in and it'll look beautiful. That's looking centered. We'll see it on the big screen. And usually when it comes to caps, oh, that's nicer because we're getting a little bit of a glossy reaction, which is really classy and clean. When it comes to caps, they're usually really simple to composite in because they're just a little upside down smiley face shape that you have to mask out quickly. And that'll pay off big time, having something cleaner in that area with our other exposures. So we'll grab this rotation, we'll grab the label exposure and the glossy highlight on the bottle. And let me show you really simply how I would just combine those in Photoshop, have a ton of fun along the way, and end up with a clean, good composite. If any of you are curious about a portfolio for your product photography, let me give a quick shout out to Zyro Website Builder, today's sponsor. Because a lot of people ask me things about product photography, and a good deal of those questions are about finding clients. Well, it is always a good idea to have a professional portfolio website, somewhere you can just show off a few projects beautifully, and Zyro is a super affordable web builder. It's powerful, it's intuitive to use, there's a drag and drop interface that's really intuitive, you'll get it right away. And by affordable, I mean for less than $3 a month, which is pretty wild. You can start creating a website in minutes. I like it because it's super reasonable on the cost end of the spectrum, so you can justify it whether you're starting off or you have years of client work. I mean, you don't want large monthly bills. So whether you want a more minimalist portfolio or something with good functionality, there's a good deal of options here for showing off your work. I like minimalism. My link below you can use for up to 72% off. They have a 30-day guarantee and 24/7 support. Thank you, Zyro. Now let's composite this bottle inside of Photoshop. All right, everybody, here we are inside of Photoshop. We have every frame that's important to us, the label, the cap rotation, and any other goodies we want to improve our composite. Now, how I would stack everything vertically is File, Scripts, Load Files into Stack. That's a really easy way to stack everything vertically, especially if you have a lot of exposures, but we're keeping it pretty simple today. We brought out a background color that we grabbed from the base frame. So I just grabbed right in the middle, you know, nothing too bright, nothing too dark, right in the middle of the liquid. And we're going to put that as our background color. Your background color can be anything. I'm going for a monochromatic vibe today, but go wild. Now for goodies, I already made a selection down here, a base frame selection. I also made a label selection. And I do this whenever I composite, obviously, and you can outsource that, use a third-party provider, or you can create them yourself. I use magnetic lasso tool when things are super linear like this, and just let, I'm not even doing it, here we go, just let the lasso do most of the work as you go around the perimeter. That might require touching up here or there, but just take a minute or two to get a nice tight selection around both your perimeter and, if you want, your labels, which will be super useful for the label exposure. Okay, enough babbling, let's dive into this. So we want this selection around the base present, because we're going to put everything in a group and then apply that as a mask, just so we can start visualizing this background a little better. So let's grab everything and Control G to group them. And with this selection present, just click this layer mask button, which will put them seamlessly on the background, which is nice. I usually don't use full sharpness. I introduce like a pixel of feather or just shy of that, and that has served me well. Just makes things look a little less jarring. So let's grab this selection around the labels as well. We'll go to the label frame in here and give it its own individual layer mask with that selection present, just so we can composite that in. Now we can combine that with the underlying layer, but I took this mainly for legibility reasons. I want the base frame to be the most beautiful bottle possible, and I want the labels to be the most sharp, legible labels possible, and we'll combine the best of both worlds where necessary. So as usual, we will give the 1/8 of a pixel, specifically a feather, to the label, and we could have shot a speedlight on the wall, which would have taken care of this problem here, which is that this is not saturated. Alternatively, if you're using a color layer, I'm going to duplicate this, Control J, and bring it above these layers and put it on color, just to show you you could paint that into the neck for a really seamless solution. You could even apply that everywhere if what you're doing is monochromatic, under the label perhaps, and just paint that effect with a black brush in the layer mask just off of the cap, because there's no reason the cap should be affected. So I'm going to paint that effect off of the cap. But a color layer is an easy way to salvage a neck and, you know, align hues pretty quickly underneath the label to give you more of a monochromatic look, which is nice. So let's perform a few quick tweaks to make things look a little better. I'm going to, above the label, create a selective color, and in this channel, black. So I'm going to raise all the values, which is going to crispen up the dark values, which can be useful sometimes. It gives a bit of a commercial look. I'm going to Control I invert this mask and just paint this effect with a white brush over the text and anything I want to make a little more crisp, a little more high contrast, which, like I said, can look kind of commercial, and I enjoy it. I think it suits this photo. I might brighten up the left part of this bottle in general, and how I might do that is go to the base. The nice thing about compositing is you can affect, you know, everything under the label, above the label when you've separated things, and you can tweak for a certain look. And I want a bit of a brighter look, so I'm going to curve up, and we can make this completely white. It's completely isolated. I'm going to do it subtly brighter, and then invert the mask, Control I. The reason I'm inverting it is I just want to paint it in from the left, which looked a little underwhelming, a little dark. I'm going to G to bring up my gradient tool, and foreground to transparent white gradient. I'll just blend that effect in from the side. So now I have an independent brightener on the left, and I can match this, make it look a little brighter and fresher, like you might want a dental product or an oral health product, maybe I should say, to be. I think that's looking kind of bright and nice. One of the other extra frames I brought in was the label exposure, because it had another little nice highlight near the top here. I'm going to Alt, click Layer Mask to invert it, and I'm going to bring out a brush with B and on lighten mode for this layer, and maybe low flow. I'm going to paint in that little detail of the bright spot up here on the two ledges, just to give them a bit of definition. And it's kind of attractive. What do you think? Sometimes when you're compositing, other exposures, like the label exposure, will have weird elements you want to blend in. And if it's just a one-off photo, I'll typically do that. If I like the way it looks, I'm going to blend this in subtly just to define those ridges. And I think it looks better with those highlights than without them. And it adds a bit of beauty to the image while defining the shape, which is a 2-for-1. Now, one thing I wanted to mention is these dark areas around the side of my selection. This happens sometimes. It can be useful if it looks clean and consistent. And I've covered this before in one other video, but what I like to quickly do, within the confines of this layer mask, I'm going to make a new layer. It's at the very top, and I'm going to paint around the perimeter, just grabbing colors like this. And then with a smaller brush, on full flow, I just want to show you how you can eliminate that line into something cleaner just by painting sort of an inward color around the edge. And as the color changes, you can grab a new color. And holding shift for straight lines, I'm just painting around the edge of this product. I'll do the same thing on the other side where it's a little brighter, and this shows you how important it is to grab a new color. And I'll just paint it down there. And sometimes when it's really bright, you actually want a bit of a darker color. Like this color might be a little more appropriate, just to define it off the edge in a cleaner way. So I'll stick with this darker color here, which will make it look a little shadowed on the edge, but that'll be pleasing to the eye. And I'm just painting that over. And I'll keep that going down here. And I could have updated my color a little bit more. Let's do one final one around the horn here. And I'll do a quick before and after, and you see it really does clean things up and almost gives it a more digital look. Before and after. But it's a little less distracting, and you can get customized with, painting in low lights and things like that, just to make sure it's sitting off the background in a way that looks clean, but also well defined. So for the cap rotation, a number of things we could do. We could totally replace it, but I'm going to try to get a little sneaky and just composite in the rotated, whatever you call this, child safety mechanism grabber. So let's grab that cap rotation. And how should I go about this? Well, it is already pretty aligned, so why don't I just bring this to the top, and I will Alt-click this button to give it a layer mask. And let's start just by kind of sloppily painting it in with a brush over here. And I don't know if the sort of things are going to align, these bands, and they seem to have actually aligned decently well. I'm going to get out the black brush and remove that effect down here, just leave it as it was. But centering that makes it a little classier, like 15% classier, and you're getting an idea of the material finish here, which I appreciate. We could probably darken this layer to make it match a little better, but I'll go through this kind of quickly. I'm going to grab a selection tool. I have 10 pixels of feather, that's pretty heavy, but maybe I'll grab this, and I'm just floating the idea of flipping it just for a little less asymmetry. So once this selection's present, I can just hit Control J, Control T, right click, and flip horizontal. I do this all the time. I move this and duplicate highlights when it is appropriate. Don't worry, all this outside stuff won't be here. I'm just looking for the shape to align, and that looks kind of appropriate. Hold Alt and make this layer disappear with a black mask. And finally just paint it in where you want it to exist. And I want it to exist just on the inside here to get a little bit of an idea of the material finish and hopefully not obscure too much stuff. I don't really want the symmetrical look that straight up. I also want some of the highlights from down here. So I'm going to reduce the opacity and just make this subtle, like a subtle, 3-to-1 ratio or something, which kind of looks nice and just looks a little less incomplete, I think, than having the layer without it. So that was an optional tweak, but you can do things like that when you have something symmetrically flippable at your disposal. If we add a nice shadow to our exposure, it'll start sitting a little more believably. I can increase my canvas size subtly, and I'll just paste that background color in the back, and then we'll add a shadow. So let's grab this background and just paste that color. That's not the same color. Just so it sits a little wider. There we go. Now we have room for a reflection, or pardon me, a shadow. You could do a reflection. If this is straight, just flip it vertically. Sometimes a shadow looks nice on a flat background, and I'll show you why. It can add some real dimension. So the first thing I want to do to add a shadow is bring up my ellipse marquee tool. And with black in the foreground, I want to make a bit of like a Bugs Bunny looking hole, if that makes sense. I'm going to, with that selection present, create a layer mask and then fill the layer with black. And I think you get what I mean by like a cartoonish hole, like this is about to fall down it. And I just want to match the plane to make sure I get the plane correct. So maybe make it a little bit skinnier. Maybe a little taller. And just keep doing this until the plane looks like it's sitting correctly. I think something like that looks kind of half appropriate. And I also want to feather this mask, which is why I use this as a mask. Now I can feather and just get an idea for what I want it to look like. We're going to do a pretty feathered shadow, and let's apply this effect. And I want to make it a slight bit smaller. Something like that. And we're going to do a couple shadows to make it look more believable. And we're going to bring them all in really subtly, just so nothing gets too crazy. We'll start with something subtle like this. And we can duplicate this shadow and make it more sharp by making it more, thinner. Like I want a thin dark line to be a secondary shadow because I don't want this to look like it's floating. I like the soft feathered shadow, but I want to add a second one right beneath the product to create like a harder shadow. So I'm going to make a mask for this second layer, hit B to bring out my brush, and with a large black brush, I'm going to omit this sharpened shadow from bleeding over too much. So you kind of get an immediate shadow where the product bends up, you see some dark shadow, which makes sense, and then some sort of broader shadow falling behind it. Nothing too much in front, because I want to keep it looking like it was lit, like the label was lit, so we can keep it kind of consistent. And the other things I would do to make sure everything's looking nice is just straighten out the labels a bit with the use of the selections and the rotations, just getting out a ruler, maybe taking some time. And then I would just do a run over my product and make sure I'm retouching little blemishes here and there, little pieces of dust to make things look really clean. So thumb up this video so it can spread around the internet. Thank you for following us along, and we'll be back with a lot more compositing and Speedlight work here on Workflow. So stay tuned, make sure you're subscribed, and until next time, have a beautiful day. Ciao.